Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Infusing Mindfulness into Your Teaching and Relationships. Today's offering was originally presented at the July 2018 National Faculty Meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our presenters on the line are Christy Wake. Christy is the Associate Director of Instructional Design in the Center for Faculty Excellence. We have Dr. Nina Spadaro. She is a licensed psychologist and skills development coordinator in the School of Counseling. And Reeves Whittle Thornton, licensed professional counselor, certified Tai Chi instructor, and also a student here at Walden in the CES program. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Christy Wake. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you, Lita. And today we're going to be discussing just an overview of what mindfulness is, and that's really open for interpretation as well. Nina has worked to kind of, study some of the definitions that are out there and incorporate her own experience with that. So we'll discuss an overview of mindfulness. We'll talk about how meditation can impact the human brain. And then we'll move on to a Tai Chi listening, movement, and mindful listening activity that Reeves will be leading. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we might incorporate mindfulness into our teaching and relationships. And Nina will end the session today with a guided meditation. And Nina, I'm going to pass it to you to discuss what mindfulness is.
I was preparing for this presentation, it occurred to me that I needed to have a true understanding of the various ways that people interpret that term, mindfulness. And I'm sure that there are many that I haven't even approached, but I think I found about 50 different descriptions of what mindfulness was. And in this particular version that I'm offering, it's really an amalgam of many of the key concepts that I saw as themes throughout all of them. And so I want to discuss some of that with you all in the sense that taking this little definition in front of you apart, that usually mindfulness is not something that we engage in while we're talking, although that's not actually the truth in terms of what we're going to be doing today and bringing this to be relevant to us as faculty, as professionals, as students. But mindfulness is generally a wordless practice that involves being fully present in the moment and observant as though you are a distance away from what is going on and able to choose your calm focus in the present moment. Mindfulness is a practice, and it is a practice that people can get better at by bringing attention to your bodily sensations, your surrounding environment, the thoughts in your mind, the emotions or feelings that you might be experiencing. And this is a real key, all the fragments of your life as they actually are, including those that you dislike, you view as important or as trifling, which means that you suspend judgment when you're in a mindful state. You don't worry about whether or not it's important, you like it, you don't, or it's unimportant. You just pay attention to all of the sensations, internal and external, as they impinge upon your consciousness. So mindfulness is an internal state that can be practiced, and this is an important piece because I think a lot of people think that mindfulness is really mindlessness, as though we can actually stop thinking, and we can't. What we can do is to practice this state over and over and over again, in short little bursts, and that's what we're going to discuss. Because just like, and I'm looking out a window right now at a beautiful forest, just as deer make little trails in the forest by countless trips going through the same path over and over again, we make traces in our brain. And if we practice mindfulness, the path that we travel to calmness, attention, and focus will become as natural to us and as automatic as a really worn path. And so it's important to really practice this. So I'm going to give over the platform here to Christy, because Christy, you have some wonderful information to share about the benefits of mindfulness.
Thank you, Nina. That was a really nice piece of imagery with the deer forming trails in the forest, and I think it lends itself well to what I'm going to talk about, because I think that mindfulness can really have some powerful effects on our bodies. And a piece of mindfulness that is often incorporated is meditation. And something that helped me to understand how profound the impact is by studying the human brain and learning about the effects that meditation specifically has on the brain. So I wanted to share first just some interesting things about our brains, because they really are pretty amazing, lots of potential there. So on average, our brains are about 3.3 pounds, and they receive 30% of the blood in our body. Our brains have about 100 billion neurons, which means that the potential connections that each of those neurons have in our brains, they may as well be an infinite number. And those connections are those on and off firing patterns that we have as we're thinking, feeling, doing different things throughout the day. And the number of those connections is thought to be larger than the number of atoms in the known universe. That's just in one human brain. So there's a lot of power and potential and amazing things happening in our brain. Something that makes this especially interesting, I think, is neuroplasticity. And that just means that our brains have the ability to change and grow based on repeated practice. So each time we think, feel, or do something and our neurons are firing, that repetition makes the pathways that they travel more defined. So just like the trail that Nina was mentioning with the deer in the forest, walking back and forth down that same trail, it's very similar. Neural pathways can get more and more defined the more that they're used. So again, what you practice grows stronger. And I think about, too, another good example is if you recall back to when you first learned how to drive a car and all of the effort that you put forth in thinking about how to do it correctly. It really took a lot of effort initially when you're learning to drive a car. But now, most of us, I think, are to the point where you can hop in your vehicle and drive somewhere, and it feels like you take very little effort, very little thought to get where you're going, because those pathways are so well defined now. So some examples of a few studies that have been done to document this neuroplasticity include the London taxi driver study, loss of sight or loss of sense, and POWs in isolation. So I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk through each of these to just really hone in on what neuroplasticity is. So the University of London studied the brains of cab drivers to learn how their brains adapt to having to retain large amounts of information, specifically all of the roads, the names of those roads, their geographical location, and further all of the places on those roads, the businesses, the restaurants, the shopping. And what they found was the hippocampus in their brain, which is an area largely responsible for memory, was much larger in the brains of these cab drivers than the average person, the average non-cab driver. And they also found that those cab drivers that had been on the job the longest had the largest hippocampus. So pretty neat to see that repeated practice of memorizing those roads, their location, the businesses on those roads, actually caused their brain, an area of their brain, to grow larger, to encompass that information. And I just think that's so fascinating. Another example is loss of sight. So we know that if one sense is lost, let's say our loss of sight later on in life, the areas of the brain that would normally be devoted to handling that sensory information, they don't actually go unused. They just get rewired, and they get put to work processing other senses. So you might say you have a heightened sense of smell or heightened sense of hearing. If you lose sight, you know that those areas of your brain are rewiring themselves, which is, again, an example of neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to change and adapt. The last example I have is some studies that were done on POWs, prisoner of war soldiers, and these individuals had spent a lot of time in solitary isolation. The one man spent a lot of time trying to do math in his head, and at the end of his, and I don't know how long they spent in isolation, but the end of his time there, he was able to multiply 12-digit numbers by 12-digit numbers in his head. And I know that if I think about doing something like that, I know that I would have a lot of difficulty keeping all those numbers straight. Another individual, another POW, spent his time thinking a lot about his early childhood experiences, and in particular, kindergarten. So he was able to eventually remember all of the children's names in his kindergarten class. He spent so much time and effort and energy thinking about that time in his life that he was able to regain that information. And as you know, again, I think back to my kindergarten class, and I don't think I can remember a single person offhand. So it's crazy to think that someone could come up with all the names, 20 to 30 children. So those are just a few examples just to hopefully help you better understand what neuroplasticity is, and understand that potential exists in other scenarios as well. So if meditation is what is repeatedly practiced, mindfulness is what is repeatedly practiced, your brain's going to change physically. And my next slide here talks a little bit about what studies have revealed in the brains of meditators. So this individual here is a Tibetan monk. His name is Dr. Barry Kurzik, and he was actually a physician to the Dalai Lama, and he was a keynote speaker at a conference that I attended recently on mindfulness. And he shared this image of himself with us, and as you can see, he's got a lot of little sensors on his head. He's hooked up to a brain scan, and he's meditating, and they're measuring his brain waves and looking at the different areas of his brain and seeing what areas are more active than others and what areas are physically different from the average human brain. So obviously he's a very practiced meditator, very versed in mindfulness. And so the results that we see from a scan on a monk might be quite a bit more significant than maybe an average meditator or someone who has just started. But it still lets us see the potential there. So what they found was that there is a thicker gray matter in the brain of meditators, which is directly related to increased self-awareness. And if you think about meditation And a lot of the guided meditation in particular, and how we're often being directing our attention to different areas of ourselves, that makes sense. It makes sense because if you're repeatedly practicing that, getting more in tune with your body, your feelings, that would make sense that you would have more gray matter. So pretty neat that they were actually able to see that. It also enhances brain regions associated with emotional awareness, attention, concentration, empathy, and compassion. So really, all of those areas, I believe, are mostly in that prefrontal cortex area of your brain. So those areas are larger, more active in the brains of meditators versus non-meditators. We've also found that there is increased folding of the brain tissue, and that is when you look at the surface of the brain and you see those wrinkles and the folds and the lines in the surface, that's what they're referring to, and they've seen that there are more of those in the brains of meditators, and that is related to improved efficiency. The other things that they have noted are the rate at which your cortex thins is slower in the brain of a meditator. And we should note that cortex thinning, is just part of the aging process. It's a natural part of the aging process that we all undergo. But to know that the rate at which that is happening is slower in a meditator's brain is pretty incredible, because that leads to diminished psychiatric disorders, and it offsets neurodegeneration, which we know is Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease are some examples of those. And if we can slow the rate that those types of diseases and disorders are occurring, that's pretty amazing stuff. So not only are we more at peace and better able to regulate our emotions, but we can physically impact our health. A lot of people will use meditation as a treatment method as opposed to taking actual medication. Sometimes it works quite well for people who are managing chronic pain to become at peace with what they're feeling and be able to better manage stress and anxiety. There's a lot of research out there that talks about how we are nowadays finding ourselves in a constant state of fight or flight. And that's not how we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to be stuck in that stage. But we have very busy lives nowadays, and it's quite common to be stuck that way, and it's not a healthy thing for our brains and for our bodies to be stuck in that state. So meditation, mindfulness, it's an excellent way to help us move out of that state into a more relaxed state of acceptance and just being in the present moment. So with that, I'm going to hand things back to Nina and Reeves to allow them to talk through their Tai Chi activity.
And this is a great lead-in to the activities. There are two that Reeves and I are going to be presenting now. And the first thing that the concept that I want to get across is that humans are relational creatures. We are often in relationship with one another. And sometimes mindfulness and meditation is conducted when we're alone in private places and quiet places. But I want to introduce the concept that when we are in relationship with one another, we can practice a form of mindful listening that can yield many of those same healing results that Christy just outlined for us in terms of gaining internal balance. And it's also a healing, as you see in this wonderful quote by E.E. Cummings, one of my favorite poets, by the way, that through listening and being heard by another person, oftentimes our self-esteem is bolstered, and we start to see who we are through another's eyes and ears. So listening carries much promise. And in order to be good listeners, and obviously as a psychologist, and I've been a psychologist for about 40 years now, and Reeves is also a mental health counselor, and we both are martial artists, we're going to weave together some of our experiences having to do with mindful listening and the healing that that promotes in both parties, the listener and the listened to, and also and how we incorporate some of the lessons learned through the practice of Tai Chi in particular, which many people uh, relate to because they see beautiful visual depictions of people moving very slowly and very gracefully in um, beautiful flowing circular movements. And Reeves is going to explain more about how that's actually informed by listening within. And then after that, I'm going to explain some principles of listening that can be very healing and how we might relate that to what we do on a daily basis as we work with and for Walden. So I'm going to let Reeves take the next piece and introduce you to Tai Chi movement.
Tai Chi has been referred to as meditation in motion. The intentionality of all the details of the movements and the forms that are practiced are actually ways to help facilitate to gain the internal feelings of being able to listen not only to yourself, but as you see in the picture of the two young men who are doing an exercise together, to not only listen to yourself, but to extend that awareness to another person. And so through this very intentional practice of developing the listening skills, the mindfulness, and the awareness, they are able to achieve through that practice a greater skill level of listening. And so what I'd like for you to do now is join me in an exercise. And if you are comfortable to do so, please stand up and place yourself into a comfortable standing position. If you're not comfortable standing up, you can remain seated and just listen to the sound of my voice and the instructions that I'll lead us through as we go through this exercise of learning how to practice how to deeply listen, and from that listening transform in this exercise to transform it into movement. And so to begin, first, as best as you can, bring your awareness to the top of your head. And as you do so, if you're comfortable, please close your eyes so that you can more clearly become aware of the internal sensations. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, just half close them and stare uh, gently towards the floor or at the wall or at the scene in front of you. And so as you bring your awareness to the top of your head, feel from the top of your head that it's being drawn up to the ceiling and to the sky above you, as if a thin chain is attached from your head, drawing you up gently towards the sky. And then feeling the rest of your body drip down from the top of your head like a drop of water being suspended from the tip of a leaf. And letting that sensation of relaxation and dripping down into the earth, down through your feet. And as best as you can, project your awareness down through your feet, down, down into the ground. Relax your shoulders and your elbows and your hands. Let them drip down toward the earth. and relax your chest and your abdomen and your hips, and let them drip down to the ground. And from your hips, slightly bend your knees and through your ankles, and have everything drip down through your feet and down into the ground, while still being suspended from above, from the top of your head, that silver cord up to the sky. And now, as best as you can, bring your awareness to your eardrums and let them soften inward. And allow all of the sounds that are in your environment to come to you and come into your awareness as you listen. You can hear the sound of my voice. You may hear other things in your environment, but just let those sounds come to you and see what you can hear. And I'll be quiet for a few seconds to allow you to listen deeply. And now, as best as you can, as you soften and continue to soften your eardrums, begin to listen inward. Listen to the slow, smooth inhalations of your breath and the slow, smooth exhalations of your breath. Listening to the beat of your own heart. Listening possibly to hearing your blood going through your veins. And just notice any sensations, any sounds that you hear inside. And again, I'll be quiet for a few seconds to allow you to do so. And now to work towards transforming the sensations that you hear and deeply listening to feel the sensations in your body. And listen to how your body, and there is no way to do this wrong, of how your body wants to move right now in this moment. Can transform the sounds and sensations of your environment, both external and internal, into some sort of movement, or listening to how your muscles may want to move. And as best as you can, as the slide says, move like no one is watching. And just let your body lead the way. Let your sensations lead the way. And again, I'll be quiet for a few seconds to let you experience this listening and transforming it into movement. And now, as we bring this exercise toward a close, you can continue moving if you like to, but bring your awareness back to your breath and hearing the slow, smooth inhalations and the slow, smooth exhalations. bringing your awareness back to the top of your head, being drawn up to the sky by that thin silver cord, and feeling the rest of your body just dripping down, down through your feet, down into the ground, and feeling like that suspended drop of water on the tip of a leaf. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes if you've had them closed, or bring your awareness back to your surroundings. And I'll turn this over to Nina to continue through the presentation.
Thank you, Reeves. I certainly enjoyed moving while you were directing some of my attention. But now I want to bring this concept of listening deeply to the realm of listening to others. And so if you'll notice this next slide, you've got mail. Sometimes as faculty, as colleagues, we receive messages that seem urgent and sometimes maybe even a bit aggressive or offensive to us. The photograph on this slide shows the surface of a very still pond. And if you stand and stare, you will see only the reflection of what is outside and nothing of what is beneath. So if you're peeking at this sample email that could be sent to a professor, you could just look at the surface and respond to the offensive, threatening, angry, insulting tone, the blame, which is so very easy to see and to respond to. But if we really engage mindfully with our eyes, our ears, and our heart, then we can observe certain principles that I've outlined here on this next slide that will cause the ability to look beneath the surface and see more truly with the heart, which is stolen broadly from a beautiful quote from The Little Prince written by Saint-Exupéry. It is only with the heart that one sees rightly. Now, also on this slide, you will see to the left a picture of an old child's game called dominoes. Most of us in conversation, when we are not being mindful, listen in conversation to those things that are known, listen so that we can respond. And in the game of dominoes, you always are observing to see, if I have a 3, does someone else have a 3? If they have a 4, do I have a 4? Because we're always trying to match and build upon what the other person is saying with our own response, without necessarily listening more deeply to the true meaning beneath what their statements are saying to us, or the way that their bodies are moving, or the way that they are breathing, which I admit is difficult when we're looking only at written messages, as all of us who text today are aware. But here are 7 principles to consider, 8 principles to consider when listening to another person. First of all, engage your curiosity. As humans, we're often endlessly curious. And instead of being furious, get curious. Observe your own body and breath. Reflect upon what was actually said, and then reflect upon the emotions that might have been the foundation of those things having been said. Relate to the other person with empathy, emotionally, and consider the context of the message that's being sent. It's often tempting to stray from the present moment and instead think about past hurts and past events that might have seemed similar, like that dominoes game. Instead, stay with the moment, stay with the current process of engaging with this person here and now, and avoid solving what you might perceive to be their problem. Instead, just suspend yourself in this non-judgmental state of acceptance and noticing. And now, looking at this email a second time, looking beneath the surface of the water and listening for more deeply the intentions and the emotions, I'm going to ask that you think, what might be going on with this individual? What is this about? Is it about me? Or is it truly, as most of our communications are, about the communicator? And what is this saying about how they're feeling, the context of their lives, what their emotions are, if they're worried or anxious? And that gets communicated so often as anger. What's truly going on? Yesterday, when we did the webinar for an audience, some of the offerings of people who were noticing this communication were that this person sounds very overwhelmed. They have a lot of spinning plates in their lives, and obviously they're worried and anxious about a grade. They're afraid of our judgment. They possibly might even be being afraid that perhaps they are an imposter, because oftentimes people suffer from imposter syndrome, thinking that they are a fraud and someone has finally caught them out, which is a horrible feeling of insecurity. So if you listen with that context, you can actually approach this person with compassion. And the concept of mindfulness and listening and compassion join hands and create a more healing, understanding communication in response. So now I'm going to invite some discussion among all of us who are present on the line, Reeves and Christy and myself, about ways that we have learned from listening to others doing this presentation in Minneapolis and online and with one another in our lives. How do you see mindfulness being woven into your teaching and into your collegial relationships at Walden?
Thanks, Nina. I can jump in and share a little bit. So we did a live version of this webinar just yesterday, and we had some folks chime in and share some ideas for how they are already using mindfulness in their teaching. And one of the attendees shared that she meditates prior to grading student work. And I thought that was a really great use of mindfulness in teaching, because I think it makes you really calm yourself. Who knows what may have been going on earlier in the day, and you might be feeling stressed, or you might have anxiety about something happening later on in the evening. Maybe you're concerned about something that's just happening in life. But if you just stop and take stock and calm yourself, regulate those emotions, and then look at your grades, I think you would be, I guess, perhaps more fair in grading, and you might have more compassion or empathy for your students as well, especially if you're having a student that's struggling a lot and you've spent a lot of time with them, and maybe you were hoping that their paper they submitted would have been of better quality, and that might make you feel frustrated. But if you've meditated, maybe you'll see it from a different perspective and have a little bit more patience. So that's just one
Yes,
example. And
one of
for
the
you,
things that
Lena, I'm sure you
we
guys have
talked
some
about
other
yesterday
ideas as well.
was the aspect of mindfulness is very powerful and profound as being as a sitting meditation. But as there are other types of mindfulness exercises that are movement based, uh, such as Tai Chi or yoga or other types of martial arts, or even in taken with the right intentionality of mountain biking or skiing or kayaking or any type of physical activity. One of the things that we promote with this type of mindfulness is self-care, especially for professors and students who are online who tend towards sitting a lot and typing a lot. One of the things that I've found that have been helpful, and Nina and I will do at home when we've noticed that we've sat for too long, is to get up and to do a 5 minute Tai Chi form or for 15 minutes or some yoga or go for a walk, but with that mindful intention of being in the present moment as best as we can. And as well as to get the physical exercise and bring our mindfulness to our bodies in an effort towards that type of self-care.
And I'm going to add to this, I'm just thinking of our wonderful new provost who's been our dean and a colleague for years, Dr. Savitra Dixon Saxon. She starts every meeting by really talking about where everybody is at the moment. Very personable. And when you are calm, and I think and I hope certainly listening to this webinar that you have induced a state of peace and calmness already, when you approach others in the current moment that they're in or ask them, where are you right now? How do you feel right now? Oftentimes that takes out the wrinkles that have been created by maybe some unpleasant events or memories or experiences. And when people are calm, and I'm referring to this in meetings, I think that meetings go better. People are more open to hearing one another's perspectives and integrating the wisdom of others, and we operate better as an organization. So it's kind of internal self-care, relational self-care can become organizational self-care based on principles of mindfulness. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a meditation looking at this gorgeous photo, which was taken by Christy's brother near Lincoln City, Oregon. This is a real place, and this is a beautiful example of a visual cue that one could use. And certainly, I think most of us have learned to put some of these beautiful and calming, affirming kinds of visual cues on our computers that we often look at. I see people have beautiful pictures and pictures of people that they love that makes them feel beautiful inside. So for a moment, gaze upon this photo and let your eyes travel wherever they want to the horizon or to the water gently lapping the shore. And let your mind travel wherever it wants to places that are here and now or places that were in the past. And notice your mind starting to settle and focus upon images that induce a sense of calm and peace. So if you can imagine yourself holding on to this feeling of peace and relaxation while you're in a meeting, waiting for your turn to speak, to possibly offer a challenging perspective to another person, whether it be a student or a colleague. And let this sense of calm and peace and presence and a sense of well-being infuse your next statements, your voice, your demeanor. I think you can see a wonderful way that mindfulness can inform a more compassionate and collaborative relationship with all the people around you. So, in case any of you might be interested later, and this PowerPoint will be part of this recorded webinar, you can see some of the references that the information that we presented in here are based. And I want to thank you for giving us the gift of being present with us here today. And I hope to meet you. I know that I speak for Christy Wake and for Reeves Whittle Thornton that you will see us at various Walden events, and I hope to be able to share a smile of reminiscence of spending this moment together. Thank you very much for joining us in this webinar.